Awesome, we thank the speaker for her speech. I'd now like to invite the second affirmative speaker to come and continue their team's case.
Do money and skills buy happiness? This is one of life's oldest questions, and I'm not going to answer it immediately. But one thing that I can guarantee to you right now is that having money, having an education, and being able to provide for those you love mitigates the vast majority of factors that cause unhappiness in life. On our side of the house, we pursue quality of life, and we see that not only does life have value, but a good life has value. And life on its own can be filled with pain, suffering, and depression that only our side can guarantee mitigate. And I'm going to discuss in my speech how being able to acquire skills immediately and in a guaranteed way is a great benefit to every single human being. But first, I'm going to answer 3 questions, which is what gives value to life? Are humans capable of making rational choices? And are people in situations of poverty able to lift them out of those situations? So first, on the issue of are humans able to make rational choice, the opposition has said so far that you cannot consent because you are not aware of the situations of future you and past you. The issue here is that this is the fundamental nature of life, that you make decisions about yourself in the future. Yes, I admit that no one has foresight and you cannot predict what's going to occur to you, but you can make an educated guess. And as an adult, as we brought up in a point of information, you make decisions about how you want your life to play out and your quality of life. And we give that because no, thank you. We value autonomy, we value independence, and we believe that people are qualified to make these decisions, and that when we have the technology to do so, that should be available. There was then the idea about that people can't make it because of marketing, and that Western capitalist society pushes these terrible ideas on them. So first of all, once again, I think this is largely a very negative view of adults and their ability to make decisions. Yes, marketing has an impact on you, but it doesn't make every choice for you. Once again, we allow people to choose to buy products or choose to take a job, even though there can be external factors like your family or like a billboard. We think that humans are intelligent creatures that are able to somewhat, to an extent, deal with this. Even then, largely our society has done quite well on this model, and people are encouraged to do things that not only they enjoy, but they bring them the most personal utility, whether it be in the form of money or it be in the form of education or skills. You know, society isn't going to constantly, no thank you, society isn't constantly trying to get people or remove them or hurt them. In many ways it's working, and again, we allow people to make their decisions. There was a fear from the other team that the market would become far too competitive for people. On one level, we see this as a positive. We actually see people getting really valuable skills that can build industry. And this goes off what the opposing team said, which is that they believe that in places, say Saudi Arabia, we have the resources to help those impoverished. And the truth is that we might, but we're absolutely not using them right now. On our side of the house, we can actually guarantee those people the agency to build these skills. And the opposition said these skills won't be useful in an environment in poverty because you won't be able to, say, buy things or work in a place. But these places don't have specialists and they don't have skilled professionals who can actually provide services that can build up these communities, that can build housing, that can bring education, that can actually build utilities and services for the whole population. And they never will because, yes, they're in a situation where they're not coming in the first place, but we can guarantee that they can acquire them even if there is no school to give them or there's no trade specialist to teach them to you. Finally, briefly, there was the idea of racism, and we do condemn racism. We think it's terrible if someone feels that they're pressured to change their skin color or something to that effect. But we believe that in a relatively prosperous society, we'll say like New Zealand, there won't be a massive pressure, and that we actually do encourage multiculturalism largely. I'll take a minute. We do largely encourage multiculturalism. As my first speaker said, if a rational adult believes they're in a very pressured situation, say you're an extremely oppressed minority, or you're potentially facing, extradition or execution, it is actually a rational, very unfortunate decision to potentially change your skin color to avoid such persecution for you and your family. I'll take the POI now.
When there are millions of women in India who sacrifice particular bits of their life to bleach their skin white, but they're not facing death, how is that a world in which you should be willing to stand for by forcing those women to effectively kill themselves to do so?
Well, actually, I see a massive positive on our side, which is we're not forcing these women to kill themselves. We're forcing a very, very minor change, except we're not forcing them to, say, bleach their skin, which would be an extremely painful and potentially life-threatening thing in itself. Because in the long term, you're not solving racism. Racism will continue to exist. People continue to say, put tar on their skin or something in an attempt to change their life. Where at least under our system, I can guarantee that for a very small price, you will get this change, and you not do something that's detrimental to your actual quality of life in the future. On to the next question is, what gives life value? So the opposition say that life is ultimately good, and we actually reject this, that life is not ultimately good for a person if they're struggling with something like addiction, or they're in a very bad social circumstance, or they're in massive poverty where they have to watch their kids starving every day. Because what gives life value is happiness, and happiness is unfortunately not inherent to every human being. But again, money might not buy it, but money buys food for your kids, it buys you housing, and it buys you mobility, it buys you value. You can contribute to your society. As Julia said, you can build up your society, you can produce. Effectively, what we offer you is a solution to your problems, an ability to be productive and produce towards your society. And when it came to the idea of valuing a multicultural society and wanting different skills, we agree, and we provide more skills on our side. Our side is inherent in providing skills immediately, instead of just lots of people with life who are unable to provide anything at all. And finally, there was the idea that beauty will never be satisfied. This is a very unfortunate issue. Yes, we agree that there will be some extremely irrational people who will only value beauty. We believe the vast majority of people going through our system are rational adults. They'll be seeking out skills, and just like the euthanasia bill in our country, you actually have to go through a psychologist who will, assess your mental rationality and making a decision. So largely, it's not superficial, and the plethora of opportunities regarding skills or removing terrible life-ruining traits is very much available to the vast majority of the population. So then onto my split point, which is the benefits to average citizens, and that's through guaranteed skilled acquisition. So as we said, the fundamental truth of our economic existence is that you trade your lifespan for something. Your time is used in a job, and use that for money to acquire things that you desire to have. And outside of the house, we offer two major things. The first that's already been discussed is we can provide a guaranteed cure or a fix to a lot of ailments that we simply don't have the technology to provide for, or people are unable to do because of their situation. And we also offer, you can get a guaranteed skilled acquisition. And even though I said that our system is about trading your time for skills, the fundamental truth is that getting a skill isn't a guaranteed, and it's not an instant. Acquiring an education or acquiring a job is a very long and grueling process, and it can be drawn out at times. There can be many factors that can get in the way, that can prevent it from happening. The pandemic, I'm sure, has thrown a wrench in many people's education or job plans, or you can just have a circumstance where you're financially unable, or you have a disability, or a variety of reasons that getting this education is largely impossible. It could be your circumstance, whatever. And what our system means is that you will instantaneously gain the skill, and this provides two major things. The first is you're not wasting your time or money. If you were to potentially fail your education, or you to be removed from your education, or something to stop you from doing so. But on top of that, the costs that are from an education, there's more than just initial upfront cost. There's also opportunity cost, which is during a long-time education, you're not able to earn, you're not able to take care of your children, or a number of circumstances that if you're, say, an impoverished person, as Julie brought up, we very much push towards social mobility. If you're in an impoverished situation, you are unable to pursue this education in the first place, even if it's right next door, even if you have the finance to do so. You need to be earning, you need to be taking care of children, maybe you have other relatives. And outside the house, you can get that immediately. You can put those skills to work, you can start earning, you can build up your community, you can take care of your family. So on our side, we believe that social mobility is absolutely necessary for this society, and would absolutely be willing to allow people to trade their lifespan to get it. Thank you.
Awesome, we thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite the second negative speaker to come and continue their team's case.
Can everyone hear me? Cool.
Let's not forget that the first affirmative speaker told us that they stand by Rohingya Muslims changing exactly who they are. They stand by them achieving the goal of genocide for the perpetrators, and they stand by the ones who are not willing to do so, the ones who are not willing to sacrifice who they actually are and everything they believe themselves to be. They stand for them, therefore being cast away, therefore being forgotten about, because everybody thinks that they had the choice, that they chose to be persecuted, that they don't deserve help. 3 things in my speech. Firstly, is this a legitimate choice to make? Secondly, what is the trade-off of life and quality of life? And finally, a split point, which is the harms to those who choose not to make this trade-off. Firstly, on the legitimacy of this choice, we told you 3 reasons. Firstly, that these people cannot consent because they are different people in the future. The reason that this is different from people working in the mines is that you're not actually, when you make this decision, actively having to experience the outcomes of it every single day. It's something that happens to somebody probably decades and decades in the future, that you are unable to properly understand what that actually looks like for them. And we think it is entirely pushed into the future, and people don't actually have to understand what that means. They said people make this trade-off all the time, but this is a trade-off that has not been seen before. It is a guarantee that your life will be years and years shorter.
On that point.
That is the only certainty in this debate. We think that is an incredible harm. Second reason these people can't consent is because there's immense pressure from society. This was really brushed off, considering Penelope explained this very, very eloquently, by the idea that this is just marketing. People can overcome marketing all the time. Firstly, they just can't. That's the reason why we're all we all fall victims to capitalism and we just buy stuff when we really shouldn't. But secondly, we know that this isn't just marketing. It's often decades or generations worth of society telling you that you must be a certain way because that determines everything you are. Women are already willing to bleach their skin. We think they're very likely to essentially be willing, or think that they're willing, to kill themselves in the future in order to fit this terrible societal standard that now people can brush off because they think that it's a complete choice whether or not you do so. Third thing to say is these people are crowded out of opportunities. They told us that this was positive because of industry, but let's look at what this actually looks like. It means that people cannot get a job anymore, that people cannot get a spouse or a partner anymore. They are denied so many things unless they change their ways, unless they essentially kill themselves early. That's the type of pressure people are under. That means consent has never and will never be valid in this debate. Why does this win us this debate at the very start of my speech? 2 reasons. Firstly, because consent is inherently valuable in and of itself. They told us that there was more to life than simply living. We tell you that may be the case, and that is consent that is particularly important in this instance, that people should be able to have control over what happens to them. They should be able to have autonomy. That's enough to win us this debate. Secondly, however, all of the material about people having better outcomes in the future is contingent on people being able to make good decisions. We think if you're unable to make good decisions because you're not able to legitimately consent, then it's unlikely you're going to be able to take your entire community out of intergenerational poverty because you're unable to understand what that really is. Moving on then to what is the trade-off of life and quality of life. First, I'll take a PLI.
Isn't it true that under the status quo, you make long-term decisions like consuming alcohol or taking on debt for education all the time?
I can explain this quite clearly. Firstly, you're on our side, in this case, you're not having to constantly deal with this, so you don't really understand what it looks like. You push it completely in the future. Secondly, we're literally talking about removing years off of your life, not simply aging a little bit early because you spend too much time in the sun. That's very different. We've made this very clear since Penelope's speech. On then to what is the trade-off between life and quality of life. We heard that they can essentially fix a whole catalogue of random problems. We give you 5 responses. Firstly, note that we can also fix a lot of these responses. If they're able to play God in this debate, we think we're allowed to maybe have some better social welfare problems. That means that people are able to change the agenda if they so desire, that people are able to be lifted out of poverty without actually having to sacrifice who they are. Second thing to say is that a lot of these problems actually can't be fixed in the way they wanted to talk about. Just because your face now looks different doesn't mean that you're not being the victim of genocide anymore. You're probably still being persecuted. Just because we tell you that being unintelligent isn't the reason that so many people live in slums in India, and it was quite shocking that they suggested that was the case. The difference between them being in slums and being out of slums isn't having a higher IQ. No, it's actually by us coming along with these social welfare programs that note are exclusive on our side of the house, because now people care because they can't brush it away saying they chose to be in this conditions. Thirdly, we tell you that people's problems change very often, and what they conform to changes. We think when a new shape and colour becomes fashionable, they're likely to take more years of their life, and more and more and more. It's a terrible harm. Finally, we tell you, if AF wants to stand by not everyone being pressured into changing this about themselves, we think they had to stand by so many people being left behind. I'll talk about that a little bit more in my split. Finally, in this clash, we told you that people are so often very, never happy because they're constantly seeking something else. They're constantly trying to follow trends. The thing that's different about the status quo is that we force people to accept who they are. We think that can happen without taking years off your life. That is always going to be better. Finally, we told you that minorities are forced to give everything up. We told you, and we don't think this has been responded to properly, we think that everyone is forced to give this up, or those who aren't are no longer really helped. We think this is a terrible harm. On then to my split point about the harms to those who don't make this trade-off. This point proves that everyone who doesn't consent and doesn't trade in their years live much worse lives because of the people who do. Note, it can be true in this debate that both lots of people are pressured into choosing to make this trade, and there are still some who don't. This is about those who don't. So, how are they now harmed? 3 reasons. Firstly, they're judged every single day. The basis of not judging people is that everybody is different and nobody chooses the outcome of the birth lottery. Now people have no problem with telling you that you're inferior or useless or a lost cause because they say you chose to be that way. Secondly, people are less inclined to help them. Government policy and charity relies on lots of people having sympathy for these people because they think they were just unlucky. Now, no one's going to fight for people with disabilities because they say, why don't you just change that? I don't care. Thirdly, there are now just fewer people to lobby for change because you're being abandoned for all of those who are like you, and now people have far less incentive to care. Why does this matter in this debate? 2 reasons. Firstly, because people continue to be born into these hardships because society thinks they can just trade their way out of it. People stop looking for a cure for things like genetic diseases because they think that can be solved, and they force these people to simply kill themselves early in order to fix the problem. Instead of people wanting to create a world that is simply far less racist, they just tell everyone being born into that race to cut their lives short in order to fix that problem. That is abysmal, that is morally bereft, we can never stand by that. Finally, we tell you that these people who aren't terribly coerced into making this decision are just far more miserable. They're being judged by everyone, they're being left behind, they live worse lives. At the end of today's debate, people are coerced into making these decisions. People are never happy when they choose to make these decisions, and all those who don't make the decisions are left behind. They live worse lives. Very proud to negate.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to invite the 3rd affirmative speaker to come and finish the substantive portion of their team's debate.
What we've heard from the opposition is that a few potential irrational decisions of a small number of people override the right of people to lift generations after them out of poverty and to remove the conditions which cause immense suffering in their life. We stand for this inalienable right while the other team seeks to tear it down. The other team has argued in a perfect world where they can fix racism and end capitalism, but we are the side of the house which is arguing in the real world where we have to deal with the real issues with no easy solution. So 3 questions in this debate. Firstly, how people make these decisions. Secondly, how this impacts disadvantaged communities, and lastly, what happens to people who aren't willing to make this trade-off. So on to the first point of clash. So how do people make these decisions? So firstly, we believe that fundamentally rational adults have the right to make determinations on their life. This is an inherent point which inherently stands unless the other team can tear it down. So let's look at their attacks on it. So firstly, they've said that you can't make decisions for future you because that's like not, you just can't see in the future. We'll reject that because people every day make decisions on the basis that this only affects them in the future. Like at the end of next year, I'm going to have to take out some student loan, which will affect me years into the future. Like that's a decision that I am within my rights to make if I think it will better my future. There are so many decisions people make every day where the impacts are long-term. Again, if we go back to the example of drinking, when you choose to drink, you are unlikely to face immediate health concerns, but after a period of time, you will. Again, this is people making decisions in the present for themselves in the future. We don't see any moral issues with making decisions on the future as long as you are a rational adult who knows, who is well informed, which we believe under our model will be everyone. The other line of attack we've heard is that people will be facing a lot of pressure to make these decisions. 3 responses. Firstly, our model removes the most likely cases. So for example, young people who are like under 18 will be unable to make this trade as was established at first. So, and as well as the fact that because of there will be a psychological examination, people who are unable to make rational decisions will also be unlikely to make a trade. Secondly, we've also, if a lot of the source of these irrational decisions is insecurity, people can also make the decision to simply remove insecurity, which we have also established at first. Thirdly, people inherently value life. So unless there is a major harm in their life, they are unlikely to make the trade-off. Like, I don't know, I want like slightly better hair. I'm not willing to trade my life off because of the immense cost that it would take. So only in extreme cases would people actually make this trade. And even if some people make this decision based off external pressure, if this pressure is causing significant like harm to their life, like a significant emotional harm, then this is like, again, a reasonable decision to make. If this removes that pressure, we believe that people are fully within their rights to make that decision. And even so, at the end of this point, we're the side of the house which actually stands for more autonomy. If people don't want to make a decision, they don't have to, but under the opposition side of the house, they only remove autonomy. Secondly, how does this impact disadvantaged communities? So several groups of stakeholders talk about, firstly, in terms of minorities. So what we've heard from the opposition is that all like diversity would just end because minorities all would just want to be part of like the collective. So firstly, like in less extreme cases, like not everyone just wants to conform. Like I don't want to be white. Like a lot of people get a lot of pride from who they are, so that they are unlikely to just make this decision, especially if there's a significant cost. So most people are unlikely to make that decision in environments where they aren't facing extreme repression. But let's look at the people who are, because that's also been an issue in this debate. So what the opposition is saying is that minority groups facing extreme oppression, repression, and even ethnic cleansing should be forced to go through all of that immense and unimaginable suffering just so that we have marginally more diversity in the world. We completely reject that, because respecting these groups means respecting their right to self-determination and to remove the immense suffering that the opposition is simply condemning them to for the sake of diversity. We completely reject this point and believe that it is morally abhorrent. These groups should have the right to improve their lives and to remove suffering if they so decide to. And again, because of the immense cost, both in the loss of like their identity, but also the cost of their lives, people will not make this except in the most extreme circumstances. For example, we look at the Rohingya in Myanmar, we look at the Tutsis in Rwanda during the civil war. If these people want to literally save themselves and their families from genocide, we believe that they have every right to do so. I'll take that point now.
What happens to all of the marginalised people who are unwilling to change who they are, but have now been left because people assume they had the choice to be victims of genocide?
Well, very few people will actually make that choice. If you tell them either change who you are or you and your family will literally face genocide, almost no person would willingly pick the amount of repression that these minority groups face every single day. Virtually no people would fall into that category, so it is not relevant in this debate. Even if they do this, so they just simply doesn't stack up. Let's look at some other groups. So the other groups we've heard about, the other thing we've heard about is in terms of people who live in environments of people who are born into poverty. So the other teams say that there's simply more ways to like remove people from poverty. Like they talked about, well, if you're poor in Saudi Arabia, we can just like make you not poor by sending you resources. That doesn't happen in the real world because that's just not how things work. You can't just like snap your fingers and end poverty. What it takes is a long period of development, like economic and social development, and this will be significantly sidetracked if people can suddenly get these skills and experiences they need to like create jobs in their environment, to create growth. We actually are able to remove, we actually able to get intergenerational outcomes that relieve poverty. Well, but they've also strawmanned our arguments, and like they've pushed on us the idea that we say that people are only in slums because they're too stupid to get out of them. That is a complete and utter straw manning of our case, which we completely reject. Our argument is that people can't escape the cycle of poverty because they do not have the skills and the capital necessary to remove it. This has nothing to do with their inherent intelligence. This is complete straw manning on behalf of the other team. So the actual issue is a lack of skills, which we can solve in our model. They've also talked about the other problem at first, like people who have physical traits which make their lives harder. So firstly, they've said that they have a counter model to fix these social issues. We have seen no analysis as to how or why that would happen, and that wasn't even brought out at first, so we don't believe it stacks up in this debate. And they've also told us that some of our problems can't be fixed. Again, no analysis as to why under our model we couldn't fix the conditions we've laid out, so that also doesn't stand in this debate. So fundamentally, none of the attacks they have levied on our side of the house stack up at the end of these 2 points. So let's look at the last point of clash. How does this impact people who don't want to trade off? But first, I'll take your point, if you have one.
Yeah.
No worries, no. Oh, yeah. You're muted.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
If people in poverty are not able to access resources, why are any level of better skills going to actually help them to improve their situation?
Because those skills allow them to create and like get those resources. If people in like the Central African Republic suddenly have a lot of knowledge into like how to industrialize and automate like mining, that improves the amount of resources. The problem isn't a lack of resources, it's a lack of skills and capital to leverage it. So to my last point of clash, how does this impact people who don't want to trade off? So firstly, we have to establish that the majority of people in this world will not make this trade-off. Only people who have a lot to lose in these status quo will actually trade off because of the immense cost. So a majority of people, a very small number of people will actually do that, so you won't be judged for not making this decision, because again, most people won't trade. So that responds to the first line of analysis. The second line of analysis is that there will be fewer people to lobby for you. But again, we see that as redundant, because if this is like an extreme situation, we believe that it is a rational decision to remove what is actually like making your life so much harder. We believe that is a fully rational decision. So that again, that point doesn't really stack up at the end of this debate. So we are proud to protect, but also the House, we are proud to protect people's autonomy and their ability to improve their own lives, while the other team would tear it all down. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to invite the third negative speaker to conclude the substantive portion of the debate.
Hi, everyone can hear me, all fine? Sweet, okay. I think the affirmative side of the House has sort of forgotten what they actually stand for in this debate, because they don't stand for giving people just a better quality of life. They stand for disadvantaged people all across the globe, literally ending their lives early, literally killing themselves before their time in order to get things that rich, privileged people already have access to. Every benefit they try to claim on their side of the house is something that can be achieved when you just care about disadvantaged people more, when you give them better access to social welfare, and you don't literally make them kill themselves to achieve unsustainable societal standards. I'm going to be bringing you two clashes, sorry, to the House today. Firstly, we're going to answer the question of consent and how people cannot actively consent to this. Secondly, we're going to be talking about how we get how their side of the House has massively harmful outcomes on minorities and just people in general. Okay. Into this first clash here, note, we told you at first that ACT cannot win this debate at the point where they don't prove that people are properly actively consenting to an action like this. We don't have to win the debate here, but I'm doing it first.
On that point,
that they lose this material, they lose this debate. What did we tell you? We told you first and foremost that both parties entering into this agreement don't actually exist properly. We told you at the point where you make this decision, future you doesn't exist, and it's such future you that you can't actively consent. You don't understand. You can't possibly comprehend the situations in which you will be. This is like Ulysses contracts under the status quo, in which we see aren't legally recognised for the same reasons which that future person can't actively consent to the harms they are accruing onto themselves. The only response we heard here was that, well, people under the status quo make sacrifices, like people in impoverished countries enter into dangerous workplaces every day. Right, they use the word every day here. What this means is that these people actively consent every single day to undertake the possible harms that will occur to them during that day. This isn't just something they decide to possibly happen in the very future. The second analogy they brought to was about alcohol. We're right, when you drink alcohol, we don't think it's like a pressure that Western capitalist society is enforcing on you. We think it's maybe something you do to enjoy. But furthermore, you're accruing a possible harm. You're not drinking alcohol knowing you're going to die of cancer and have a shorter life. You're drinking it, maybe you might have a liver problem, maybe you might age worse. Again, those are different levels of consent. Nothing no thank you, the world has seen currently exists under status quo. People cannot possibly consent. But then we brought you more reasons to why this consent is completely destroyed. First and foremost, we told you that the pressure from society just exists here, which stops you from being able to do so. The only response we heard was marketing's kind of bad. No, they didn't adequately deal with this at third. So the responses we gave you at second about how marketing is incredibly persuasive and drastically changes the way in which people behave. But furthermore, this isn't just marketing, it is perverse societal standards. The reason women in India bleach their skin is not because of marketing there, it's because of perverse standards imposed by imperialist Britain on the people. We think societal standards are always going to exist. And the most important thing here is that these drastically impact the way in which people behave, the way in which they are able to actively consent to decisions. These, maybe they told you this, they constantly use the words of these are rational adults, but rational adults are constantly pressured under the status quo, and we've continuously recognized that those pressures mean they weren't able to actively consent. They never wanted to deal with the pressures people will face to make problematic, harmful choices. Therefore, this means people cannot actively consent. They lose this debate here. But I'm going to go further then about the impacts on people here. And this is where we told you the massive harms that exist on their side of the house. Right, what did ACT tell you? Oh, actually, before I get into this, I'll take a POI now.
How does your side of the house remove those imperialistic standards?
Okay, we don't have to remove those imperialistic standards, but we're perfectly willing to stand for them being regressible. What your side of the house do is literally kills people for being forced to conform to those. We just have people accruing other possible harms, again, which we think aren't very great. So what did ACT tell us here? They told us that life is just better for people on their side of the house. And the first line of analysis we heard here was that identity is fine to be sacrificed for material benefits that such as you can provide for your children, etc., etc. I found this point morally bereft, because it's just ridiculous to suggest that identity is not directly tied to your life. They told you they would be happy to allow Rohingya Muslims sacrifice particular bits of their race and identity in order to just be alive. Okay, identity is incredibly important to the way in which people interact with legitimately everything. This is why people who are being genocided for like Yazidis in the Middle East do not just convert to Islam, because their religion and their identity is so vitally important to them. This is why we have like religious genocides in which people refuse to conform to this other oppressive religion, because their identity of that heritage is so important to them. This is when people with like particular facial features get plastic surgery and then massively regret those later in life because they feel like they've betrayed their ancestors and their cultural heritage. We reject the idea that identity can be sacrificed for anything. We think maybe people make the trade-off.
On that point,
oh, I'm willing to just possibly give my family a better life in the future, but they live that life with terrible guilt, with the terrible harms of sacrificing incredibly important things. That should be something, and then having to die early, we never force on to those people. But furthermore, they then told you like ignoring, like,
on that point,
passing that material, no thank you, that they immediately just like start work now and they can just like raise all their people out of poverty. This is where they hung their hat on this debate, and like the only place they tried to win. We already told you that you just by like having the skills to be able to know
on that
how
point,
to mine doesn't mean you're going to suddenly be able to start diamond mining in the Congo and then like lift your entire community out of poverty. Just having some new knowledge doesn't mean you have the resources. The only response was, well, now you might know how to build a drill to be able to get the resources. We just think
on that
that's
point,
not how this actually works. It's to do with just like the finite materials which you have access to. Just being slightly smarter isn't going to be the way in which you achieve those resources. What does this mean? It means they don't lift these like massive communities out of poverty in the way they try to suggest they do. Simply, they told us that we can't just like give people in Saudi Arabia money to lift them out of poverty, but they're just like giving them some more brains and suggesting it'll do the exact same thing. We tell you, if they have the fiat power to legitimately change the entire way that humans work, we probably have the fiat power to suggest that we can have better social like welfare structures throughout the world. We can have better societal ways in which we help the poor. We told you that minorities are forced to conform to Western ideals and standards. You legitimately will get situations of ethnic cleansing in which people conform to Western beauty standards that were opposed due to colonialism. They never wanted to deal with them on their side of the house. But furthermore, we told you at second about how people don't have the opportunities to like about how the harms that exist for those who don't make those trade-offs. Sorry about that. We think that's a massive harm for those people. They never engage with that. At the end of this debate, we protect vulnerable people who don't kill them before their time. Proud to me.
Awesome, thank you very much for that speech. As is customary, we now reverse the speaking order, so I invite the negative team reply.
Two questions to ask yourself at the end of today's debate. First, can you consent to this decision? Secondly, what is the impact on your quality of life? Firstly, on consent, note that only we can win off of this point alone. That's for two reasons. Firstly, because consent is inherently valuable. That has been conceded because we've heard no response. People should be able to have autonomy over their lives, over whether they live or die whenever possible. Second way we can win is because people can only improve their lives, like AF want to argue they could in the second clash, when they can make good decisions. But even if this isn't enough for us to win this debate alone, winning this clash and proving people don't have consent really pushes the burden on side F to win the second clash by proving certain benefits to many people by miles. We think this matters a lot in this debate. This could change the outcome. We gave you three separate ways somebody could not be able to give consent, and note that we win on either of them. And note that we can win this if any one of them is true for most, or for many people. We told you that you often can't consent to harms for a future person, and we gave you a whole lot of reasons that their range of examples was different. But even if they weren't different, we told you that they were regrettable, and that if it is consistent with what is happening right now, we still think we don't stand by it. Secondly, that there is immense pressure from society. We've told you about this all down our line. It's far more than an ad on a wall. It's been told for generations that you have to change. That's something nobody can consent to. People don't consent to now. People won't consent when they are forced to make this decision and forced to take years off of their lives. Thirdly, people are crowded out of opportunities. They are unable to access things like money and jobs and partners. That is what forces people to essentially kill themselves earlier than they needed to die. That is what wins us today's debate. But secondly, and note we can win this too, what is the impact on quality of life? Izzy's just done a really, really good job of dealing with all of the mechanisms of this debate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 3 different types of people who might be making this decision and what it looks like for each of them. The first type of person are people who live in abject poverty or who might live with various disabilities that make their life harder given our ableist society. We told you a couple of things that were true for these people. Firstly, that simply changing a small characteristic about themselves or raising their IQ isn't enough to help them completely improve their quality of life. We gave you many examples for this. We told you that being taught how to engineer a mining drill isn't the reason there are so many people in abject poverty at the moment. It's the fact that they don't have resources that doesn't change. What we can do is we can achieve this in other ways, but know that this was always mutually exclusive to our side. That was the split that was material would given you all down our line, and that's because people are only willing to give resources to these disadvantaged groups when they feel like they haven't chosen to be in that unfortunate situation, when they feel like that is the only hope for being able to improve the lives of these people. Second type of person then are those who are pressured by society to follow a trend. We think we've very clearly won massive harms to these people because they are constantly changing who they are to follow trends. They are never forced to actually accept themselves and to be actually happy, and they lose decades of love and happiness and possibly meeting their future grandchildren and all the types of things that really, really you need extra years of your life to be able to enjoy. And we've told you about the benefits of simply having time. Since Penelope, they miss out on this. They have lived far worse lives because of this. Finally, we told you about victims of racial or ethnic abuse, how they're very often going to be coerced into changing to make their lives better. But those who don't, because it's very important to their identity, live far worse lives because nobody is now willing to help them make their lives better. We prove that people cannot consent to this terrible thing. We save lives, we make people's lives better. Very proud to negate.
Awesome, thank you very much. I'd now like to invite up the affirmative team reply to finish off the debate today.
Okay, we all ready to start? Okay. In a perfect world, poverty and racism wouldn't exist. The negating team wants to live in this world, but the fact is that they do exist. Underdeveloped communities are trapped in generational poverty where there are no jobs in the education and no education available. Our side offers rational adults the trade-off of some of their life to gain the benefits and skills needed to create sustainable prosperity in their lives in areas that is going to persist for generations and lift countries out of poverty. So F has consistently argued this massive straw man of our case, suggesting that, like, for example, we think that people in slums are too stupid to leave, when actually we just say they need the education and resources to get out of there, which we will be providing under our side of the house. And we want to clarify that our burden is to prove a positive impact on people's lives, not to like solve poverty, which is what Neg has been pushing on us. We say like maybe we do solve poverty in the long run under our case, but we don't have to do that to win. We just have to prove a positive benefit on people's lives. Okay, so with that in mind, 2 questions in this debate. Firstly, how do people make these decisions? And secondly, what is the impact on disadvantaged communities? So under the first point about how do people make these decisions, we say that this is a gigantic choice. People weigh up a lot in their minds when they're trading off part of their life for a new skill, for a new appearance, for a new trait. They're only going to do it if they really, really, really want to. We also say that we have these models and systems in place to ensure people aren't just doing it for some social pressure. They're getting they have to go to a psychologist who makes sure that it is a rational decision before they just go ahead. It's not like a spur of the moment decision to do anything, okay? So F has told you that people actually don't have any rational choice because they can't see the future and they'll kill their future selves. We say, like, firstly, humans are intelligent, so we have ability to see past marketing. But our second line of response is that is the literal nature of life, is that you can't see what is coming in front of you. We always make decisions for the future. For example, drinking, which we do think you trade off your decision to like damage your liver. In the future might take some years off your life, but you're doing that for the fun. You are making that decision. It is part of life to make decisions for your future. To say that you have no rational choice, so we should like not allow you to do that, is basically just to decide that no human should ever have a choice to make a decision because it will impact them in the future, which is just downright ridiculous. Okay, but we also say that like there's this pressure, they told you about pressure on people having to make the decision. We say that like firstly, under our model, we get rid of a lot of those harms. Secondly, you can just remove the insecurity trait instead of removing the thing that makes you insecure, which is part of our thing. Secondly, thirdly, we say it's only in extreme cases that people are likely to make these decisions. Finally, they told us that people will just want to conform with people around them. We say most people like don't make this decision because they have a lot of pride in their cultural identity, as Tony told you. So they won't just be like, oh snap, I want to be a certain race. Okay, but we also say we respect the right of people in these like super disadvantaged situations like the Rohingya Muslims to alleviate their own suffering, rather than they negs this like principal idea of having more diversity to like satisfy Western comfort and relegating these people to lives of suffering. We think that is absolutely despicable. Okay, so what is the impact on disadvantaged communities? Firstly, this idea of conformity. We told you we should not be making decisions for these disadvantaged people who want to keep their identity, but also if they want to save their own life by changing their race, that is their decision to make. Okay. They also told us about this like pie in the sky idea of like the value of life, but we never really got told why that was that important in this debate, given our concrete benefits towards people's lives, which I'll be talking about now. So we told you that we'll improve people's lives when they have things like disabilities, or they want to transition, or whether they have addiction, that kind of thing. They can remove the struggles in their lives so that they can have happier lives. And they told us like in response, like we can just have some social welfare to help people transition easier, which we think is like absolutely not an adequate response, does not address the underlying issues that make transitioning such a difficult thing to do. But also like in terms of people in third world countries, like we give them the empowerment to develop when we give them skills. But firstly, like Neg told you that they'll just get some more resources, but secondly, that like that's not how it works to just get resources. We say the start of development comes when you get education so that you can build industry, etc. So basically, we have rational decisions, we've proven rational decisions that can change people's lives for the better. That is why we win this debate.